The wind clawed through the refugee camp, lifting dust into the pale sky as Farid stumbled over the uneven ground, clutching the tattered leather satchel that held everything he owned. His breath came hard, his mind numb from the endless miles behind him and the uncertainty ahead. He had once dreamed of crafting beauty, but here, beauty was a distant memory. A volunteer handed him a cup of watery soup, her smile thin and weary. Farid said, "Thank you," though the word felt small against the weight pressing on his chest. The camp smelled of damp canvas and smoke, a restless hum of voices speaking in many tongues. Somewhere, a child cried, and the sound burrowed into him. Every step reminded him of what he had lost. His workshop, his tools, his city skyline in the amber light of dusk. Yet, in the dust and despair, a stubborn ember refused to die. He imagined gears turning, springs coiling, time ticking forward. The world had taken everything, except his hands, and the skill etched into them. That was a gift no border could confiscate. The bus was overcrowded, its cracked vinyl seats pressing against Farid's knees as it groaned toward the city. Outside the fogged windows, farmland blurred into industrial outskirts, the horizon swallowed by gray cloud. He kept one hand on his satchel, feeling the familiar bulge of the wrapped gear inside. A boy across the aisle stared at him, curious, perhaps sensing the stranger's displacement. Farid offered a faint smile, then turned to the window. In his mind he was already sketching designs on imaginary paper, lines and arcs forming intricate shapes. He whispered, "One day," to himself, the words swallowed by the hum of the engine. The bus jerked over potholes, the air thick with damp coats and tired breath. He didn't know if the city would welcome him, but he knew it was the only place to start again. The city was colder than he had imagined. Stone buildings loomed, their windows like unblinking eyes, and the streets hummed with voices that carried no warmth. Farid moved among them, unnoticed, the rhythm of his steps out of sync with the crowd. He found a narrow alley where a flickering sign advertised repair, in peeling paint. Through the dusty window, he saw a cluttered workbench and a man bent over a watch case, tools spread like surgical instruments. The smell of oil and metal wafted out when the door opened. Farid hesitated only a second before stepping inside. The shop was dim, lit by a single desk lamp casting a pool of warm light over the workbench. The old watchmaker looked up, his magnifying loupe still perched on his eye. "Yes?" he asked, voice gruff but not unkind. Farid said, "I can work, I know watches." The man studied him, gaze lingering on the satchel, then on Farid's hands. Without a word, he gestured to a chair. Farid sat, the wood creaking under him, and unwrapped the small gear. The man leaned forward, curiosity sharpening his features. The watchmaker picked up the gear with tweezers, turning it slowly under the light. "This is fine work," he murmured. Farid nodded, heart pounding. "I made it," he said. The man set the gear down, then placed a battered pocket watch in front of him. "Fix this." Farid's fingers moved without hesitation, the familiar dance of precision and patience. Outside, the city noise faded into nothing. Here, in the measured tick of time, he felt the first fragile thread of belonging. The watchmaker's shop became Farid's world. The air smelled of brass filings and oil, a perfume of precision. Day after day, he studied the older man's hands as they danced across the tiny gears, the rhythm almost musical. Sometimes they worked in silence. Other times the watchmaker shared small lessons in a language Farid was still learning. "Patience," he said once, tapping a finger against the bench. "A watch knows when you rush it." Farid nodded, letting the words sink into his bones. Each repair brought him closer to the feeling he had lost, the sense of shaping time itself. At night he would linger by the bench after the shop closed, sketching designs on scraps of paper scavenged from packaging. They were crude outlines of something he couldn't yet afford to make, but the curves and lines promised a future he was building one tooth of a gear at a time. The city outside was indifferent, but within the shop walls, Farid began to belong. Customers trickled in, each bringing a broken piece of their lives. A family heirloom, a forgotten gift, a timepiece stopped for decades. He listened to their stories, learning not just about watches but about the people who wore them. One afternoon, a man brought in a fine Swiss chronograph, its sapphire glass cracked. Farid handled it as though touching porcelain. "Can you fix it?" the man asked. Farid smiled faintly. "Yes," he replied, confidence threading his voice. The work was slow, the repair meticulous. Hours later, as the chronograph ticked again, the man's expression softened. It was the first time Farid felt he had given the city something it valued. One evening, Farid stayed behind to finish a stubborn repair. The shop was quiet except for the ticking of finished watches on the shelves. As he worked, the street outside darkened, the glass pane catching reflections of city lights. He imagined his own name on a sign above a door, imagined customers bringing him not just repairs, but pieces crafted by his own hands. The thought ignited something fierce. He leaned over the work, each twist of the screwdriver a promise. In that solitude, with the sound of time surrounding him, he decided, one day, he would create a watch brand of his own. It would be precise, beautiful, and enduring, just like the life he was trying to rebuild. The watchmaker noticed. One morning, he placed a small box on the bench. Inside lay a set of fine tools, tweezers, screwdrivers, a loop, old but well cared for. "Yours," he said simply. Farid looked up, startled. "Why?" The old man shrugged. "You'll need them." Farid felt the weight of the gift more than the tools themselves. It was a passing of trust, of craft, perhaps even of legacy. That day his work felt different, each motion deliberate, each adjustment infused with gratitude. The tools fit in his hands as if they had been waiting for him all along. Word began to spread in small circles about the refugee watchmaker, who handled time with reverence. Collectors brought him rare pieces, young couples brought him their first shared purchase. He treated each with equal care. One evening, after closing, he set a repaired watch in the display window, adjusting the angle so the street lamp outside lit the dial perfectly. He stepped back, watching it gleam like a quiet declaration to the city. "I am here." And though no one stopped to look that night, Farid knew the journey had begun. Winter came hard and the shop's windows fogged with each breath of cold air that slipped in. Farid worked with gloves off despite the chill, his fingers steady over delicate mechanisms. One evening, a man in a tailored coat entered, the scent of expensive cologne filling the small space. He placed a watch on the counter, a rare piece, platinum case, moon-phase dial, the kind Farid had only seen in catalog. "It stopped," the man said flatly. Farid studied it with reverence, then nodded. "I can bring it back." The man's eyes narrowed as if testing him, then he left without another word. Alone with the watch, Farid turned it gently in his hands. This was no repair. It was a chance to prove himself to a world that didn't yet know his name. For 2 days, Farid worked in near silence, dismantling the platinum watch piece by piece. He laid each component on black velvet, the parts gleaming under warm light. He could feel the watch's history and its wear, the careful scratches of decades. As he replaced the worn mainspring, he imagined the kind of atelier where watches like this were born. Bright, clean, filled with the hum of tools. That dream didn't intimidate him anymore. It was a destination. The final gear clicked into place, and the watch began to tick, soft and steady, as if waking from a long sleep. When the man returned, Farid placed the watch on the counter without ceremony. The platinum caught the light, dial perfect, seconds hand sweeping in flawless rhythm. The man picked it up, studied it for a moment, then looked directly at Farid. "This is better than factory work," he said quietly. Farid felt heat rise in his chest, though his voice remained calm. "It deserves that." The man gave a short nod, paid and left. But a small card was left under the watchbox, a name, an address, and a crest embossed in gold. Farid turned it over, heart racing. He didn't know it yet, but that crest would open doors he had never dared to knock on. The address led to a private club, all polished wood, velvet drapes, and the low hum of conversations wrapped in wealth. Farid felt the eyes of doormen on him as he stepped inside, his coat plain against their tailored precision. A man from the club guided him to a table where collectors sat, each wrist gleaming with a different marvel of engineering. They spoke of calibers, complications, and histories with the ease of old friends. When asked to show his work, Farid placed the platinum watch on the table. The room fell quiet as they leaned in, the light catching on every polished surface. In that silence, Farid realized they were not looking at a refugee. They were looking at a watchmaker. Later that night, Farid walked back through the city streets, the club's warmth still clinging to him. In his pocket, a folded invitation promised a commission, a chance to design a custom timepiece for a client whose name carried weight in royal circles. The thought was dizzying, but his steps were steady. Snowflakes began to fall, catching in his hair as the street lamps painted them gold. For the first time since leaving his homeland, the future felt close enough to touch. He whispered into the cold air, "This is only the beginning." Winter light spilled pale across the bench as Farid traced a new bridge design with a trembling pencil. The watchmaker watched without speaking, his loop forgotten beside a tin of screws. Farid said, "They want a custom piece." The old man nodded once, neither congratulating nor warning. Outside, tires hissed over slush, the city hunkered under low clouds. Farid sketched a moon phase set in a deep enameled dial, stars hammered in gold, a movement skeletonized to breathe. He whispered to himself, naming every plate and jewel as if reciting prayer. The watchmaker finally spoke. The watchmaker said, "Beauty must survive pressure." Farid smiled, then looked down at his hands. He saw the refugee camp dust in the creases, the memory of loss turn into focus. The design became a vow written in steel and time. He folded the sketch carefully, as if it might shatter if bent. The meeting took place in a glass office high above the river, the sky the color of old pewter. Victor Hale waited behind a sleek desk, cufflinks catching cold light. He gestured at the chair with a measured smile. Victor Hale said, "Your hands can open doors, but doors charge rent." A contract slid across the surface, dense with clauses that felt like nets. Farid read slowly, tracing words that bled ownership. Royal rights, perpetual license, moral waivers, ghost manufacturing. He looked up. Farid said, "The design carries my name." Victor Hale's smile thinned. Victor Hale said, "Names are expensive." The city moved in silence beyond the glass, cranes bending like patient predators. Farid felt the pressure in his ribs and the pull of his vow. He closed the folder and asked for time, pretending uncertainty while clarity sharpened. That night the shop was a cathedral of ticks, each case on the shelves marking its own small prayer. Farid locked the door and unfolded his drawing, then placed it beside a tray of hand-finished gears. The street outside was quiet, snow softening the city's noise. When he returned from the back room, the front latch clicked. He froze. A shadow moved at the window, then vanished. He searched the workbench, heart drumming. The drawing was gone. Panic flared, then cooled into pure, cold focus. He checked the safe and found a single calling card tucked in the hinge like a signature. A crest embossed in gold gleamed where no crest should be. The same crest from the club, now mocking him. Farid said, "So that is the cost." He blew out the lamp and stood in the dark, counting his breaths until fear became direction. Morning broke with iron light. The watchmaker stood by the door before Farid could speak, his coat already on, eyes distant. Farid held up the hinge card like an accusation. The watchmaker blinked once, then exhaled. The watchmaker said, "I am in debt." The words landed with the weight of years. He explained how Victor Hale had extended credit when the shop faltered, interest compounding like rust. The old man had traded access to Farid's work for quiet. The betrayal felt precise, like a hairline crack that finally ran. Farid said, "You sold my future." The watchmaker shook his head. A single sharp motion. The watchmaker said, "I bought you time." The city bell struck outside, a sound that felt like a verdict. Farid stared at the bench where dreams had been drafted, then at the door where choice waited. In the silence that followed, the watchmaker reached into his coat and set a brass key on the bench. The watchmaker said, "Upstairs." He left without another word. Farid climbed the narrow stairs to an attic he had never noticed, the air thick with oil and history. Under a canvas sheet lay an old lathe, a staking set, and a drawer of unused jewels. On the wall hung a faded photograph of a royal wrist wearing a watch with the watchmaker's initials. The past looked back with quiet proof. Farid said, "Then we start again." He opened the window a crack and felt the cold bite his lungs, then set the key beside the loop like a promise. Below, the city moved indifferent but available. Above, the attic waited, a forge hidden in plain sight. He rolled up his sleeves and chose steel. The attic became Farid's sanctuary. Days in the shop were for paying work. Nights in the attic were for creation. The old lathe purred like a sleeping animal as he cut bridges from raw brass, the filings catching light like tiny sparks. His sketches grew more daring, arched skeleton frames, enamel dials the color of midnight, movements tuned to a heartbeat's rhythm. He worked in layers of silence, interrupted only by the soft chime of a finished gear falling into its tray. Outside, snow thawed into gray slush, the city trading its winter skin for the cold shine of early spring. In this hidden room, Farid's hands built the first true piece of his brand, a watch that would not only tell time but announce his arrival to those who believed they already knew every name worth knowing. Weeks later, the prototype emerged. A skeletonized moonphase watch with a dial so deep it seemed to swallow light. Farid set it in a velvet-lined box and stared at it under the lamp. Every cut, every polish carried the weight of the refugee camp, the shop, the betrayal, and the attic hours. He imagined the feel of it on a royal wrist, the glances it would draw in hushed salons. Yet he knew showing it was a gamble. If the wrong eyes saw it first, it could vanish like the stolen sketch. Still, the watch ticked steadily, as if urging him forward. "Farid," said softly, "you're ready." His voice was both a blessing and a challenge. An invitation arrived, an exclusive horology exhibition at the Riverside Museum, attended by collectors, designers, and dealers. The envelope was heavy, the script elegant, the wax seal unbroken. Farid traced its edge before opening, wondering if this was Victor Hale's trap or his own opportunity. The watchmaker, now keeping his distance, offered no advice. Farid packed the watch, his sketches, and the set of tools gifted months ago. The exhibition was not a place for half measures. It was the kind of stage that could crown or crush. He slipped the key to the attic into his pocket, as though carrying a reminder of where the watch was born. The museum's grand hall smelled faintly of polished marble and old varnish. Glass cases lined the space, each holding a masterpiece of craft. Farid's watch sat among them, its open work movement catching stray beams from chandeliers. He stood nearby, blending into the crowd, listening. A woman in a silk dress leaned to her companion. She said, "It looks alive." He felt a flicker of pride, but kept his face neutral. Across the room, Victor Hale watched him with a half-smile, glass of champagne in hand. The air between them carried the weight of unfinished business. As the night drew on, murmurs began to ripple. A man approached Farid, introducing himself as an aide to the Crown's watch curator. The aide said, "Her Royal Highness will be in attendance tomorrow. She may wish to see your work privately." Farid felt time slow, the ticking of the hall's great clock stretching between beats. This was the moment he had built toward, through dust, hunger, betrayal, and resolve. Yet he knew that tomorrow would be more than a presentation. It would be a test, not just of his craft, but of his claim to the life he had forged. He nodded once, the weight of the attic key in his pocket grounding him. Farid said, "Tell her I'll be ready." Morning light spilled through the museum's tall arched windows, turning the marble floor into a pale sea of gold. Farid arrived early, the watchbox cradled in his hands like something breakable beyond price. Staff moved quietly, arranging chairs and polishing glass. Every sound felt amplified: the click of a shoe, the soft thud of a display door closing. He opened the box one last time, inspecting the moon phase, the skeletonized bridges, the midnight enamel. It was flawless. His reflection in the sapphire crystal looked calmer than he felt. Somewhere in the building, a clock chimed the hour, each note settling in his chest like an anchor. Today, the watch would meet royalty, and perhaps so would he. When the royal entourage entered, the air shifted. Conversations paused, footsteps softened. Her Royal Highness wore a tailored cream coat, the kind that whispered elegance rather than shouted it. The aide gestured toward Farid, who stepped forward and bowed slightly. She smiled, a gesture both warm and measured. Her Royal Highness said, "I hear you've captured the night sky." Farid opened the box, letting the light find the dial. The moon phase glowed beneath gold stars, each gear visible in graceful motion. For a moment, she said nothing, simply watching the balance wheel's steady heartbeat. She lifted the watch with care, the silk gloves brushing against the polished case. Turning it slowly, she studied the open bridges, the shimmer of enamel, the gold stars pinned against midnight blue. Her Royal Highness said, "You built this?" Farid met her eyes. Farid said, "Every paw." She nodded once, fastening it around her wrist. The watch settled there as if it belonged, the dial catching the light in a way that made the enamel seem almost liquid. Around them the murmurs swelled, and even Victor Hale, standing at a distance, could not hide the tightening of his jaw. The curator stepped forward, his voice carrying just enough for the room to hear. The curator said, "Her Royal Highness wishes to acquire this piece for the royal collection." A ripple of reaction moved through the hall. Admiration, surprise, and envy braided into one sound. Farid's breath caught, but he kept his hands steady as the curator extended a formal purchase agreement. Across the room, Victor Hale turned away, pretending interest in another display. The deal was not just a sale, it was a coronation of his craft. His name would be recorded, etched in the archive of a lineage older than the city itself. Later, in the quiet of the museum's side corridor, Her Royal Highness approached without her entourage. She said, "You have more in you than they expect." Her words were not compliment, but command. Farid felt the truth of them settle deep, heavier than the watch ever had. She placed a small ivory card in his hand, embossed with a crest different from the one that had stolen his sketch. Her Royal Highness said, "Call when you're ready to make history." Then she walked away, her steps echoing off marble. Farid stood there, the card warm from her touch, the path ahead both clearer and more dangerous than ever. The attic felt smaller now, not from its walls but from the weight of what Farid carried. The ivory card sat beside the loop, its crest like a silent dare. He spread fresh paper and began sketching, not for a client, not for the royal collection, but for himself. Every line curved with intent, each wheel placed as if part of a secret language only he could read. The design was bolder than anything he'd attempted. Dual tourbillons, a hand-painted dial of the night sky as seen from his homeland, a case forged from Damascus steel. The city outside moved in its ordinary rhythm, unaware that history was being drafted in pencil upstairs. News of the royal acquisition spread quickly, and with it came offers. Galleries, collectors, dealers, all wanting a piece of the man whose watch now lived in the palace. Yet Farid turned most away, choosing instead to guard his time. Victor Hale made one last attempt, arriving at the shop with a smile too sharp. Victor Hale said, "Partnership could make you untouchable." Farid didn't look up from his work. Farid said, "I'd rather be unknown than owned." Hale's smile collapsed into something harder, but he said nothing more. When he left, the air felt cleaner, and Farid's hands steadied on the brass plate in his vice. The day came to present his new piece to Her Royal Highness. This time there was no museum, no crowd, only a private salon in the palace, lined with shelves of horological history. She stood by the window, sunlight pooling over her wrist where his first watch still lived. He set the new piece before her, the Damascus steel shimmering with subtle patterns, the dial a deep indigo sky dotted with gold constellations. She turned it slowly, the dual tourbillons spinning like twin hearts. Her Royal Highness said, "This is yours." The words were both gift and acknowledgement, binding maker to creation in a way no contract ever could. That night, Farid walked through the city, the palace lights fading behind him. In his pocket, the second royal card rested beside a folded note in Her Royal Highness's handwriting, a commission for a collection bearing his name. He passed the streets where he'd first arrived, the bus stop where he'd clutched his satchel, the alley where the flickering repair sign had glowed above the old shop door. Each step was a seam stitching past to present. The cold air was sharp, but it felt like proof. He had crossed from survival to legacy. Years from now, in certain circles, his name would be spoken with reverence, in others with envy. Some would say he was lucky. Others would know luck had nothing to do with it. The refugee who built time itself now had his work worn by royalty, collected by the elite, and desired by those who once dismissed him. In the attic, the old lathe still waited, silent until called upon. Farid ran his hand along its worn surface and smiled, hearing in his mind the faint ticking of every watch he had ever made. He said quietly, "And the next will be better." Time, after all, was still his to shape.